Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Two Sons Podcast. I am your host here, Philip, and in today's episode, we are continuing our journey through the month of June, and we are covering all the movies that I have seen so far. So last week we did cover Thunderbolts. So obviously, if you guys have not watched that, it will probably show up here towards the end of the episode. For you guys to go back and look at. So I definitely just recorded that a couple of days ago. So if you've not checked that out, please go check that out. It was a lot of fun. Definitely a lot of fun getting back into the podcast, into the swing of things. And like I said, we're going to continue our journey through June and talk about some of the movies that I had the pleasure of seeing. And one of the other movies that I was able to see in June, which was pretty interesting for sure, because it's a well enough known franchise, but it has, been in the dark and kind of, under the radar, for the last few years for sure. But I had the pleasure of seeing 28 Years Later. Now, if you guys are familiar with this franchise, they also had two other movies called 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later. Basically, it is a post-apocalyptic storyline. Now, what's interesting about this type of film is that even though the antagonists or the people are confused with zombies all the time, they are actually not zombies. They are people that are basically infected with what is called like the rage virus, and it basically just makes them extremely primal, extremely feral, and they just basically go around and they attack people. Yes, there's biting and there's clawing and stuff like that, but the main mission of the people infected with the virus is just to spread the virus. So they are not zombies. They don't eat people. But a lot of people do misconstrue them for zombies. So if you hear me refer to them as zombies, it's just because they basically act like zombies in every way except for eating people, pretty much. But yes, I did have the pleasure of watching this not too long ago, and it was definitely a lot of fun. I really did enjoy it. I saw it the day right before my birthday, actually, I believe. So it was a nice little early birthday present for myself, which was very cool. And other than that, we are going to be diving into today's episode. So since the last time I spoke and saw you guys, in all honesty, actually, nothing much has really changed. Everything is kind of like same old, same old. Everything's going fairly well. No really complaints or anything here. I did sleep a lot better last night, so let's hope that that trends in the positive direction going forward. Excuse me. And I do have the day off today, so I thought I would sit and record another episode for you guys. So that way I kind of stay on track, and I have one preloaded for next week. So by the time this recording comes out, it will be July 14th. So it'll be next Monday. So obviously the episode on the Thunderbolts just came out this past Monday on the 7th. So this one will come out next week. But yeah, now that we got all the shenanigans and stuff out of the way, let's dive into today's episode. So this one will probably be a little bit shorter than the Thunderbolts episode, just because even though, it's a movie and there's a lot to talk about, I feel like it's not kind of like as deep as Thunderbolts, so there probably won't be too much to say. But obviously we'll go through our normal spiel and stuff like that, and we'll break it down like we always do. So the release date for this film was June 20th of 2025, so just a couple of weeks ago. Obviously the content rating was R, and it was directed by Danny Boyle. And in case people are familiar with Danny Boyle, he is also responsible for... What is he responsible for? I wish they would just what did he do? This is the second time in a row that I have looked up a director and I don't see any other of their projects. So I don't know if this was his first film or just one of his first major films that he's done. But really all I'm seeing here from a quick search is just 28 Years Later. So it might have been one of his first major breakout films. And obviously we'll go into the pros and cons a little bit later. But it definitely was a great film to break out from, for sure. Taking a quick look at the cast here, we have some familiar names, some people you might recognize, some people that you do not. But we have Jodie Comer playing Isla or Isla. We have Ella Taylor Johnson playing Jamie. We have Ralph Fiennes playing Dr. Kelson. And we do have Alfie Williams playing Spike. Those are kind of like the big main names you need to know, really. I mean, of course, there's a ton of different supporting actors and actresses, but those are really the main stars of the show. So Dr. Kelson, Jamie, Isla, and Spike are basically the main people for the movie. So again, not too well known of a cast, but especially someone like Alfie Williams. I mean, he did a phenomenal job playing Spike. So definitely a chance for some of these actors and actresses to break out in a movie like this. So that kind of covers the cast real quick. Now we are going to get into some more bread and butter, and we're going to go look at the different critic scores from all the different websites. Obviously, we follow the main three here: Metacritic, IMDb, and Rotten Tomatoes. So we're going to start with IMDb. IMDb gave it a 7.2 out of 10. Which overall is a pretty average score. So looking at this all as a trilogy and having this be like, the final movie in the trilogy, it's not that bad of a score, especially for a movie kind of like this. I think it is a pretty fair rating, especially from IMDb. Metacritic is a little bit more generous, and they gave it a 77 out of 100. So that's a little bit more than above average. So far with IMDb and Metacritic, they both have given it average and well above average scores, which is obviously great to see for a project such as this. Now, getting to the big honcho, looking at Rotten Tomatoes. Rotten Tomatoes was also extremely generous with this movie, but unlike Thunderbolts, which kind of had like an even both audience and critic score, we actually see a little bit of a discrepancy and a little bit of a difference when it comes to the tomato meter as well as the popcorn meter here. So the critics and the tomato meter have given it a certified fresh at about 88%, which is again a phenomenal score. That's like a B plus. So I mean, you're tracking, right there to do as well as Thunderbolts in our previous video that we did. So again, that is absolutely phenomenal. However, according to the audience and the popcorn meter, it's only sitting at a 63%. So we do see that this was a movie that the critics definitely loved a little bit more than the audience. And that is understandable. I mean, again, I'm sure, going into the pros and cons, there's going to be some cons where maybe people are unfamiliar with the story, or they're just unfamiliar with the lore and the background, so maybe they were confused or they just didn't understand it. But yeah, that is a little surprising, to be honest, because I've heard great things, coming from people when they saw this movie, and I mean, I enjoyed it myself. I think, off the top of my head, I think I gave it like a 7 or a 7.5 out of 10 suns, to be honest. There definitely were some problems that I had with it, but overall, I think it was a pretty good end to the trilogy. Yeah, but it is very nice to see that the critics did give it a certified fresh rating and an 88%, which is very well done. Going from there, now we're going to take a look at the box office, and I believe this movie is still in theaters, so it is still making money to this day. It might just not be as popular as when it first came out. It might not be out for too much longer, to be totally honest, because this movie did come out in June, so it came out on the 20th, so far it's been in theaters for about 2 weeks so far, so I wouldn't be surprised if it is leaving fairly soon, just because, again, we have Superman coming out. We also have Fantastic Four, so they only have, that much shelf life for these types of movies. So the budget for this movie was about $60 million, which is relatively low, but again, it was absolutely stunning visually. Apparently they filmed the entire movie on iPhones. So the cinematography, the visuals, everything about this movie was absolutely phenomenal. So it does go to show that you could make a brilliant film with a very low budget. And I think 28 Years Later is a great example of that. So far, according to the box office statistics, they have made $126.5 million. So they definitely made back their budget times two. And like I said, this movie is still in theaters, so I don't think it'll be making much more than this, to be totally honest. A more accurate number would maybe they might reach, 150 mil. But again, it's important that this movie not only made back its budget, but it also doubled it. And like I said, it is in theaters still, so it does continue to trend if people are going to go see it. So definitely a very good box office report for this, as well as some critic scores. So going into this movie so far, we have a great box office report. Again, for such a low budget film like this, that's great numbers to see. Again, the scores from all the three major sites are relatively good. and in relative good standing. And from what I've gathered from people, and was seeing it all over social media, all over TikTok, people have really enjoyed this film, and they were very excited for this film to come out. So by all accounts, so far this film is kind of passing with flying colors. Now, this is where we get into the fun part, and we get into a little bit of the bread and butter, and we dive deeper. Now we're getting to like the meat and potatoes, and we are going to be discussing what are the pros and what are the cons of this fabulous movie. So obviously we're going to start with the cons, because this podcast, we always love to end on a high note. So again, this is definitely going to be relatively a shorter episode, because again, it just is one of these shorter movies where there's not too much to talk about. So some of the cons that myself and people have seen while watching the movie is that, first of all, it does a little bit of uneven storytelling. So some critics found the narrative underwhelming and inconsistent, especially comparing the tight pacing of 28 Days Later. This I could definitely understand. I mean, even though you could like look at all these three movies and kind of consider it like a trilogy, it is a totally different story in each film. Hence, the 28 days, 28 weeks, 28 years later. So I didn't expect this film to kind of leave off or like connect the dots to any previous films. Like this, even though it is part of the franchise, this was a standalone film in its own right. It was a film that takes place in this genre, in this franchise, but has nothing to do with the first two movies. The only thing that is similar between all the movies is the rage virus itself. Overall, as a movie, looking at the plot from the beginning to the end, I don't necessarily think it is an uneven storytelling. I could see why people do get confused, because it does seem like it is more like a coming of age story. Like, we're seeing how children and teenagers are kind of growing up in this new society, this new world. Obviously, it being 28 years later, and one of the main stars of the film goes by the name of Spike, and obviously he is learning to hunt and like kind of like navigate the mainland and everything with his father, Aaron Taylor Johnson. So him going out onto the mainland and like killing one of the infected is kind of like a coming of age tale, and that's like almost like a rite of passage. So the story starts off in that direction. There are a couple of subplots going on behind the scenes, but overall we think that this is kind of like a coming of age story. And then it kind of like takes a twist, and it becomes like more of like a coming of age story versus like, okay, now he's gonna save his mom, or he's gonna try to save his mom. So it definitely does kind of go in multiple directions. So overall, it's not a very even storytelling. Obviously, we still see those like coming of age aspects like throughout the whole film still, because we see like his child naivety and like how he kind of has to like. It's one of those things where like somebody just kind of like learns the lesson, as they go along. Like people try to warn them, and then he kind of has to find out for himself. So it still does have some of those like coming of age story points, but again, it does kind of go from one direction to another, so I can definitely understand why there is a little bit of uneven storytelling. And in all honesty, I think there were some beautiful moments between him and his mother, during the movie, but I did lose a little bit of interest when it went from more of like a coming of age story to now he wants to help his mom. Again, I think overall they were trying to prove a point, because again, being a coming of age story, we see how like kids are growing up faster than they usually would. So obviously, the whole point of the relationship between him and his mother is like to kind of learn him like loss, and how you reflect on loved ones that you lost, and how you kind of like move on and get over them and stuff like that. And him learning that he can't just solve everything just by going to a doctor, like blah blah blah, like there are just some things that are out of his control. So again, yes, it does do a little bit of uneven storytelling, but there still are themes and elements of the whole coming of age that still tie in, but it definitely is something that leaves a sour taste in my mouth when it comes to the movie. I mean, if they would have just stuck with the coming of age story, I mean, they still could have done the same thing, but they could have had Spike go back out with his dad. They could have found the doctor, and they could have still done that whole entire lesson through a different lens point, and I think it would have been just as good. But regardless, again, I could definitely see why that is a critique for some people. Another one is a discordant ending. So the final act was seen as tonally mismatched with the rest of the film, leaving some viewers unsatisfied. So this has been a very big contention with people. A lot of people don't really understand the ending of the film. They don't really like the ending of the film. I could definitely understand why, because again, the film kind of comes back full circle, and we learn that Spike is taking some time away from the community, and he's kind of like living on the mainland, and he's fending for himself, and he's just kind of going through the grieving process after losing his mother and everything, and trying to kind of like find himself, right? Returning to that more like coming of age story, right? Being 13 or 14, and he's being like independent, and he's on his own, and he's hunting, and he's surviving, and he's doing all this stuff. And then again, the end kind of throws you for a curveball, because then you are reunited with the young kid from the very opening sequence, at this point all grown up, and then he is not only he's not by himself, he's with a group of people, and people have been calling them like the Power Rangers and this and that. But basically, they're all supposed to be modeled after a very, very famous British actor. I don't know what his name is, but there's like a whole like Netflix documentary on him. Apparently, he was a very bad guy. And but again, because the world kind of fell apart in the early 2000s, obviously these people didn't know all the atrocious stuff that he did, so they're still kind of like idolizing him and like looking up to him. And if anything, I think it could almost be seen as like a parallel between like how different kids like grew up like during this post-apocalyptic era, right? You see someone like Spike, the coming of age story, learning how the world works, learning how the mainland works, all this and that, going to kill an infected for his like first like trial run, and whatnot. And then you have someone like this young kid who watched his whole entire family get murdered in front of his eyes, and from a young child up until he's probably like in his maybe late 20s, early 30s, we see how the apocalypse shaped him and how he is behaving and what his personality is now from being a child, to a grown adult. So I think that was the message that we were trying to take away from it, is that we're seeing how the apocalypse has affected everybody, and how everybody, again, we're seeing these two kids side by side, and how one was like radically transformed into one type of person, and then the other one is growing up to be a different type of person. So I think when you look at it from more of like a heavier lens, and you actually take time to like think about it and stuff like that, I think the ending does make sense. Obviously, it's a huge curveball because they just kind of like come out of nowhere, and it's like almost like a fever dream. Some people have been saying that the movie would have just kind of ended beautifully, like after Spike's mother's passing and after she died, which I think would have been a fabulous ending for it as well. But I'm not too harsh on the ending as other people, and like I said, when you kind of look at it like that, it makes a lot of sense on why they included that, and where you could think they're possibly going forward from there. Another con people saw was some heavy symbolism, so while some appreciated the poetic and historical references, others felt the film leaned too heavily on metaphor at the expense of plot clarity. This one I don't really agree with, unless this point just kind of like flew right over my head. I don't really kind of understand, what they mean by this. Obviously they touch upon some like historical references and some different phrases and catchphrases and whatnot. But I don't think it was that heavy of a symbolism, to be honest. Obviously there are a couple of shots that kind of like go from like kind of like cheesy, like older, like action or like historical movies, and then kind of cuts back to real life. But I don't really see any of that here, and I think this is kind of like a point that could be overlooked really, because I don't think it's that big of a deal, to be honest. Finally, the last con that we have here is less zombie, more drama. So fans expecting a traditional zombie horror may be surprised or disappointed by the film's more introspective, character-driven approach. It's always great to have a character-driven story, something that you could kind of like bond with the character, you could like learn to connect with them, and then obviously it just makes you appreciate them even more. However, I am in agreement with this just a tad bit. I do wish that there were more zombies, or there were more infected, and we did get more action sequences with the infected. I definitely think that would have been pretty cool. I think all the scenes that we got were phenomenal, and I did enjoy them, but I would have loved a little bit more. Especially coming back after being on a hiatus for so long. I think it definitely would have been nice to have a little bit more of the infected combat clash and whatnot. Because in I feel like in all reality, I think because of the fact that they went with a character driven approach, it makes it seem like the infected problem is not as big as a problem as it is. Because, the only time that we're really, coming in contact with them or seeing them is when we're on the mainland. Um, so, yeah, I definitely would have loved to see a little bit more action. But again, I think I'll take less action for a more cohesive and more character driven story. And if this is going to be a starting point for other movies in the future, then I think unfortunately, just like any trilogy, just like any franchise, they have to have that one movie where you're like, okay, here are the characters, here are all their characteristics, their personality, like this is who they are, and then like they need to kind of set the plot, and then that way, like in future movies, they can focus on more action and less character driven approach. So. But overall, that is pretty much all the cons that I saw and others saw while watching the movie. I think the biggest thing to take away from the cons is more of the unsatisfying ending and possibly the uneven storytelling. Like I said, I think the other 2 points are kind of hit and miss, or I can understand those points, but then I could also rebuttal them. Um, excuse me. Moving on to the pros to finish out our lovely episode. We're going to start strong with some strong performances. So Comer and Ralph Fiennes received particular praise for their compelling acting. So obviously that was, the mother and child. They all did give a very phenomenal performance. Especially, the emotional aspect, and just kind of like, seeing the connection between like mother and son and whatnot. It was phenomenal. Even, Anna Taylor-Johnson, like even in the short part of the movie that he was in, he did a phenomenal job. And especially the actor that plays Dr. Nelson, I think he did a phenomenal job as well. So it was a very strong performance from the cast and crew for sure. Another point that we see here is stunning cinematography. So Anthony Dodd Montal's visions are described as gorgeous and bleaky beautiful, capturing the desolation and tension of the post-apocalyptic world. For something that was shot on nothing but iPhones, it was very stunning. I think that is how they were able to get some of these like stunning shots. The fact that they were able to get so up close and kind of like personal with the characters. So something as beautiful as this movie being shot on iPhones is definitely something to give credit for. So yeah, it really does take your breath away with the stunning cinematography and everything. Exceptional sound design, again, the background score and the musical choice, especially the use of Rudyard Kipling's poems, Boots, was lauded for enhancing the film's emotional and psychological impact. That is very true as well. They do a great job tying in the score and some of the musical choices, especially, the poem Boots. Hearing that in the background in the very beginning of the film kind of makes you feel hopeful, but then also like makes you feel uneasy. And I think when they added those pieces to the film, I think it was beautiful because I think those little choices remind you that this is a post-apocalyptic film, and that this is something that this is not just like cute like coming of age story. Like this is like, yeah, this is taking place in a world where literally anything could kill you. So yeah, I think putting the cinematography and the exceptional sound design together, I think it made for solid movie experience. The last 2 points that we have here are going to be a bold direction. So both Boyle and Garland subvert expectations by shifting the setting away from London to a remote Northumberland island, focusing on more intimate coming-of-age narrative with the zombie genre. Again, sacrificing the more like combative, like action-packed, like going from like city to city and like fighting the infected to more of a like intimate coming-of-age narrative. Is a welcome change of pace, and it kind of like refreshes the franchise after such a long hiatus. And again, I'm watching this coming of age story of this child within this genre, within this post-apocalyptic world, is definitely very interesting. And it is something that definitely grabbed my attention, and I did really enjoy. Like I said, I would have pictured maybe the story being a little bit differently, a little bit more cohesive. Like I said, they kind of lost me a little bit with the whole mother and son trip to the mainland, but overall, I think they got to the point that they were trying to make. And it was good. It was very good. And I think it was the perfect way to kind of bring back the franchise, especially if you're going to be setting up for sequel movies and more movies to come. Finally, the last point that we have here is a thematic depth. So the film explores themes of isolation, prophecy, and generational trauma, adding layers beyond the typical zombie fare. So again, this is very true as well. Again, we see, themes of isolation being played with the community as a whole. Obviously, the community is based on an island, so they are very isolated from the mainland when the tide comes in. We could see, Spike being isolated from his father, after finding out what his father does and the fact that his father's like kind of like cheating on the mother and everything. We could refer to Dr. Nelson as being isolated on the mainland, just being by himself. So obviously, the young, NATO soldier, that kind of crash lands and, becomes isolated himself, so there definitely are a couple different themes of isolation. Generational trauma, I'm not too sure about, as well as the prophecy, again, unless it just went over my head. I didn't really see any of those themes, but definitely there were some very strong themes in the film that definitely made you kind of like think and like scratch your head. It definitely just kind of went hand in hand with the bold direction that they were trying to go for in this film. So, but that being said, guys, that is going to do it for today's episode where we went over 28 years later. So, like I said, I think looking back at it, unfortunately, I only saw this movie once. But after going over the review and looking at the pros and cons, I think I'm very safe to say that I am going to give this movie a 7.5 out of 10 suns. I think the cinematography and the sound design was phenomenal. I think the acting from the actors and actresses was very strong. I think where the movie loses some points for me is that, again, I wish we would have saw more Infected, a little bit more of a combative, style of film, especially if this is supposed to be a coming of age story and he's supposed to be like, killing the infected as like a trial. It would have been nice to see a little bit more. But that's just me being like kind of like an action, nerd. Also, there are some points that the plot and the storyline does kind of lose me, and I think it is a little bit all over the place, which kind of doesn't make for that much of a cohesive storytelling, which is obviously one of the cons that we went over. Like I said, overall, I think it gets to the point that it was trying to make, but I would have loved a more linear story than one that kind of like bounces all over the place. And finally, there is something that happens in the film where basically one of the infected gives birth to a baby. And if we're going by 28 years or just 28 lore in general, it doesn't make any sense that the baby's not infected, because I feel like the baby should be infected, especially if the disease is spread through fluid and blood. So why wouldn't the baby come out infected if the mother is infected and she's feeding her blood and fluids to the baby? So I think that's one of the biggest cons that I have. Kind of like, I was like scratching my head and I was like, are you paying attention to your own lore and stuff like that? But again, overall, the pros, in my opinion, definitely outweigh the cons. And there are rumors that there is going to be a sequel to this movie. So I'm very excited to look forward to that. And apparently the sequel is supposed to come out 28 weeks later, which I think is really cool. So I think sometime by next year, obviously. So that's a nice little nod to the franchise as a whole. But if you have a chance to go see this in theaters, I definitely would. I would maybe wait for like a discounted Tuesday, just so you don't have to pay full price. Obviously, if it comes out on streaming or anything, I definitely would pick up a copy, especially because of this franchise and how notorious it has been for, their lack of like streaming services or like DVDs. So yeah, definitely go see this if you get a chance. Let me know down in the comments what you guys thought and what your own opinions on this movie were. And thank you guys so much for coming out to another wonderful episode of Two Sons Podcast, where we went over 28 years later. So if you guys are wondering where you can find this wonderful podcast and see my beautiful face once again, you could find me on YouTube, on Instagram, and TikTok, all under Two Sons Podcast, is with an O, not a U, because we are two brothers. So please keep those notifications on. I will always put out a post when the episode is posted. I might not be perfect and I might not be on time, but I will do my best to make sure that I post something to let you guys know, hey, the video is out, so you should go enjoy it. So like I said, just follow me on all those socials and stay up to date. And until I see you guys again, I hope you have a great day, great afternoon, great evening. Please be safe. Do not do anything stupid. Stay hydrated. And I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye for now.